Hello, and welcome to another episode of Indian Weekender, Hora, New Zealand. Today, let's meet a unique Kiwi musician who plays Indian music. Ever since the great Pandit Ravi Shankar took his sitar to the Western world, we've had a steady stream of Westerners who have been lured to Indian classical music. Today, it is common to see Westerners play Indian classical music with Indian instruments like the sitar and sarod. But Hamilton based Lester Silver is unique as one of the people who plays Indian music. What is unique about Lester G is that he not only plays the sitar very competently, but he also builds his own sitar. Yes, he makes them from scratch. So let's take a look at how Lester G's musical journey has progressed over the last 40 years. And how is it that he got round to making sitars from scratch? Welcome, Lester G.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's start with your musical journey, Lester G. Uh, how did it start, and how were you introduced to Hindustani music?
I'm actually born and raised in Australia.
Okay.
Although my interest in Indian classical music started in New Zealand. So what happened was that I met a New Zealand girl, and I came over here to spend some time with her and meet her family. And in the process of living in New Zealand, as you do when you're growing up and you're sort of going from youth to sort of early 20s, I was questioning lots of things in my life. And my background was fairly strict Christian background, upbringing. And moving away from home and all those sorts of things sort of opened up an opportunity for me to look around. My background at that time was reading things like Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi. And I became, very interested in the whole idea of different religions and different faiths and beliefs. So that was underpinning my sort of thinking at the time. But my background in Christian music was personal. I used to make up songs and write my own music and sing and play a little bit for the church I belonged to. And so, keeping that in mind, one time I was walking down Queen Street and there was some second-hand shops there and in Upper Queen Street, and I looked through the window and I saw a sitar. And I thought that's got to be the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. So I went inside the shop and said, "How can I buy this instrument?" They said, "Well, you can buy it if you want, but it's broken." I said, "Oh dear." So I said, "No, maybe not. I'll find out if I can get another one somewhere else." And in the process of finding out, I met Ratan Takodas, who was a sitar player in Auckland. Passed away some years back now. And I started having lessons with him, and he was able to get me a sitar, and I bought a sitar from him. So that's really how I started off. It's sort of like a combination of being interested in music in general and composing and looking for different ideas in terms of faith and beliefs, and then from there it just sort of went into becoming fascinated with the sitar itself. I didn't really know much about the music. I had no real idea at all about what the music sounded like or the traditions. So after that point, I started listening to Ravi Shankar, of course, who was the only name I knew. I didn't know anyone else at all. And so I started listening to Ravi Shankar's records and CDs, and some of the music I liked, some I just didn't like at all. It was too busy. It was like very intense, But what I did like was the slower music, and I guess the piece of music that stuck in my mind, which really I loved, was Shiv Kumar Sharma and Hari Prasad Chaurasia, Jugalbandi in Rag Jinjoti, and that is where I fell in love with Indian music. I was living in New Zealand. I'm actually an art teacher, and so I was going to Elam Art School up in Auckland, and I'd met Ratan, of course, and was taking some lessons with him. He was my first Guruji. And in the process of going to have a lesson one day, I met another New Zealand guy called Kim Hegan. He still is living in New Zealand and still plays a little sitar, I believe. And he had learnt for some years with Radhika Mohan Moitra from Calcutta. And he said to me, look, if you really want to learn Indian classical music, you need to learn, from a guru. And I said, yes, that's fine. At that time, I said to him, look, I'm going to go back to live in Australia soon. I'd sort of got to the point in my life where I was going back home. And he said, okay, so you're going back to Australia, then you need to visit and go to see a man called Alan Posselt, who was a friend of Kim's, and they both lived in Calcutta for some years and had been taking lessons from Radhika Mohan Moitra, a sarod player in Calcutta. So long story short, I went back to Australia, and later my girlfriend came over there, and we got married. And so I said to her, look, I'm still interested in Indian music. It's sort of like a fascination running around in the back of my mind all this time. By that time, I'd finished my art training diploma, and I was looking for something to do, like I didn't have a job. I was working as a sort of handyman type thing. I said, let's move up to where this teacher is in northern New South Wales, Alan Posselt. She said, okay, let's move up there. We were free and there was no strings attached. So she found out she could study at a college up there and do some dancing. And I said, oh, great, we can go up there and I can learn sitar. So my first, I guess you'd say, intense teacher where I was taking regular lessons every week was Alan Posselt, and he lived in a little tiny town up in northern New South Wales. So that was my first introduction to Indian classical music from an Australian guy. But then he also said to me, right, if you want to keep going with this, after a couple of years I was learning from him, you really need to go to India. I said, oh, great, that's perfect. I'd love to do that. So I said, well, who would I go and see? He said, well, I can introduce you to my Guruji, Radhika Mohan Moitra. I said, fine, that'd be fantastic. So he lined it up for me, but in the process of me getting ready to leave and go to India and saving enough money for a ticket and things, unfortunately, Radha Babu passed away. So what happened was that I went to India and Calcutta, and I met one of Radha Babu's senior students. His name was Sanjoy Bandapajay. And I went to meet him, and he said, okay, play something. So I played some ghat and some tans. He said, okay, if you want to learn from me, you need to come out to Karagar, which is in Madhya Pradesh. And he was a teacher there at the university. And so I moved out there, and I was actually went to India on my own at this stage without my wife. And I was there for 3 months, and I learned some things, and I thought, this is really good. So I went back to Australia. I said, right, we need to go back to India. So I guess it was sort of like late 70s. So we're looking at 40 years or something. So I wouldn't say that I've been like full on into learning and practicing all those sorts of things for the whole time, but I definitely had a strong interest. And since the children have grown up and moved and got their own lives, I've become more and more involved. So the last 10, 15 years, I suppose, like that. I'd have to say that I have another Guruji, which is Google and YouTube. My actual long-standing Guruji was Prashanta Banja from Shantiniketan. I've sort of developed a bit of I guess just my own approach of I play what I can play and what I can learn and what I've learned, and I gradually develop on that, but I wouldn't say it's any particular gharana or style.
What started you on this journey of making sitars? You built sitars from scratch, and I think you're on to your third one or something like that?
Yeah, I guess I'd have to say that I'm a practical person by nature. I'd actually majored in sculpture at art school, so I love making things. I'm a hands-on person. I like to construct and build and use tools and equipment and try and figure stuff out. So I basically have just taught myself how to make sitars. I haven't had any formal training at all. Yeah, I'll be playing on my Miraj sitar, which is this one here.
From Miraj, yeah, okay.
Miraj, it's a very beautiful sitar, which I got about 3 years ago. And I would have to say it's my best sitar that I've ever owned. It's a professionally made sitar. So what I do when I go to make my own instruments, I've started becoming a lot more organized. I've been doing measurements, and I've been doing thicknesses, and I've bought myself calipers and all sorts of things. And I'm trying to understand how to make a sitar which sounds good. So about 2 years ago, I made this sitar, which is, you know, looks nice. It sounds quite good. And I made the sitar, but the big issue with making sitars in New Zealand is this gourd here. You can't get them. They don't grow here, or you can't get the seeds, or if you try and get the seeds, MAF will confiscate them. So, which is fair enough. So I've developed another idea, which is to, through talking with a friend of mine in England, he makes or has made some sitars out of paper mache and also like leaves of paper, like pieces of strips of paper. So I'm trying that now, that particular way of making sitars, and it's going quite well, I hope. I'm halfway, 2/3 of the way through building another one in that method. It's quite a long process, and I'll hopefully be able to, at some later stage, show it to you and play it and see if it sounds okay. So let's see how that goes. There's one more sitar I want to show you, which is sort of experimental, just to show you what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see the sitars. The pegs here are more like cello pegs or something. They've been flattened out like the big violin pegs or something like that.
Right.
And also, just for interest, I've made some struts on the back.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The reason I did that was because I'm trying to figure out how to make it sound good. Now, the only way you can do it is normally by opening the whole sitar up, and you've got to cut the top off and open it up and thin things out, then glue it all back together and then try again. It's a very slow process. So I said to myself, I'm going to make a cut down sitar like this. It's sort of like a travel sitar. This back is made from teak, and the top is made from teak, all teak. This is actually part of a gourd which I cut through, and then I put the struts on the outside because I wanted to see what difference they would make as I made them thinner and added or took away things,
Right.
without me having to take it all apart all the time. So that's what I'm experimenting with as well. Also sounds quite good. Not perfect, but you know, I'm happy with spending some time working on how to get both my sitars that I've made sounding a bit better, and hopefully the next one that I'm making as well will sound even better again. So that's my journey with sitar making at this point in time.